Hello! Should Superman Legacy make $1 billion? That's an easy answer to that question. There's no excuses for any Superman movie not to make $1 billion. There's no excuses for any Superman movie not to have the success of Dick Donner's entry, Superman the movie. And before you all start, they only made around 300 million at the time. 350 million it made, nearly 400 million. And if you actually compare it, with today's financial status, that's well over $1 billion. So Superman the movie in today's terms is a huge hit and a more successful movie than Superman Returns and Man of Steel. And there's always been this question put to me: what's the best Superman movie, Superman Returns or Man of Steel? I'll say this: there's things that Man of Steel does that Superman Returns doesn't do. There's things that Man of Steel does better than Superman Returns. Superman Returns does things that Man of Steel doesn't do. Superman Returns does things that Man of Steel doesn't do better than Man of Steel did. If you put the best parts of Man of Steel and Superman Returns together, you've actually got a very, very special Superman movie. And that's the issue. There are reasons Superman Returns didn't make $1 billion. There's reasons why Man of Steel didn't make billions of dollars. Because, not billions of dollars, but $1 billion at the very least. And weren't successful Superman movie because, Dick Donner's movie was successful. And it's the standard that other Superman films and other CBMs are compared to today. So Superman Legacy has every opportunity to be successful. I don't want to hear about damaged brands or divided fan bases and stuff like that. You make a good movie, people will come out. People tell me it's very difficult. Superman's a difficult character to write for. No, he's not. He's got everything. He's a superhero. He's sci-fi based. He has so many great powers. He can fucking fly. It's easy if you have an imagination. Writing any story is a challenge. Sometimes you have a bit of a writer's block. You won't know which way to go. That's normal and natural with any story and any characterization. So there's no excuses yet. I've noticed that Access Media are already making excuses for James Gunn. The same people who refused to make the same excuses for Zack Snyder before and after Man of Steel. What you need to do with Superman is be faithful to the material. Stick to what he is. And that will make fans of Man of Steel very angry. I am a fan of Man of Steel. I think it's a great contemporary Superman movie. But at the end of the day, we don't need contemporary right now. We need something that sticks to the basics. We've tried experimental. We tried continuing from the Donnerverse. None of those things worked because both those films make quite a few mistakes. And this is why they didn't win over as much of the audience as they needed to win over. So Superman Legacy has every opportunity to make $1 billion. There is no excuses for Superman Legacy not making $1 billion. It has to make $1 billion. James Gunn is in charge of DC Universe. He's writing and directing a Superman film. Now, basically, he's hands-on in all of this. So the only person to give credit to if it's all successful is James Gunn. And if it fails, James Gunn has to get the blame. I want him to be successful desperately, despite my criticisms, my constructive criticisms of him. Yes, I know some people think I don't like the man, but I actually do like the man, and I want him to succeed. Now, even if I despise the man, I still want him to succeed. I'm fed up of DC failing, DC dividing, and polarizing its audience. We need someone to bring the best of DC. And James Gunn has a great opportunity to make a great Superman movie. Maybe that will displease people who love Man of Steel and want him to wear darker colours and no red trunks. Maybe you'll be upset. You'll have to go back and watch Man of Steel repeatedly. I watch Man of Steel every other day. And on the other days, I'm watching Superman the movie. And on the other days, I'm watching Superman Returns. I love the character. He's my favourite character in fiction. By the way, Superman Returns, Man of Steel and Superman the movie are great entries into the Superman mythos. But none of them are perfect. Because when human beings are making art, nothing's going to be perfect because human beings are flawed. That's a good thing. If you look at art deeply, too deeply, you will find a flaw if you're looking for a flaw. I was watching Superman the movie yesterday. And, Lex Luthor's supposed to be bald. In the end, we find out that he's bald, right? So he's wearing a swimming hat. And you can see sideburns popping out of the hat. And I thought, oh my God, that's such a big flaw. But it's not. These things happen. I mean, imagine the production back in the 70s that Superman the movie was huge. And we're talking about, physical effects. We're not talking about CGI. I mean, how Dick Donner didn't end up in hospital after making that mammoth movie for 2.5, nearly 3 fucking years is sensational. It's a sensational achievement for many reasons. Now, James Gunn has the opportunity to beat the ghost, to go beyond the ghost that Superman the movie has been ever since its release. It's been impossible to make a great Superman adaptation. Now Smallville managed to do something special. I believe that Superman and Lois is also very unique and very special. But I like Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. I didn't really watch that show. It wasn't really for me, but I like them. I think they did a good job, and a lot of people love that show as well. And, Man of Steel and Henry Cavill, Brandon Routh was great as well. But nothing's perfect. But Superman Legacy has to be near on perfect for Superman fans and the general audience. Can Superman Legacy win over hardcore Snyder fans? Well, the problem that Snyder fans have got, of course, they're so bruised and battered. And a lot of them are full of so much bitterness and hatred towards how their director's been chosen. Now, I'm fortunate enough that Zack Snyder isn't my director. I love Zack Snyder as a man. I love him as a director. I love his 3 DC movies. But I'm not here for Zack. I'm here for DC. I'm here for great entertainment, as I've made clear to you on a numerous amount of occasions. So I want to see a Superman Legacy that really takes Superman to his very best. But basically, a Superman movie that appeals to everyone, all audiences, not just one derivative kind of audience, right? It's not about pleasing Snyder fans. It's not about just pleasing hardcore Superman fans. It's not just about pleasing the general audience. It's about, pleasing as many of these different groups of fans and consumers as possible. And you do that by getting the basics right. And, the number one thing is to actually make a really entertaining, exciting movie with great characterizations. How do you give Superman a great characterization? Again, we go back to Smallville, that just about got everything right. In Smallville, Clark Kent is this, teenager, he's pure-hearted, he's everything that Superman and Clark Kent have always been, but he's a kid, he's a teenager. So he's also utterly flawed. He also makes mistakes. And I think sometimes it's okay for Superman to make mistakes. And I think that's how you humanize him and you give him a great characterization. It's okay for him to drop a few gags and jokes. Christopher Reeve's Superman did it to great effect. I don't think you always have to be serious, but I also want to see some serious, dark stuff within these stories as well. You can have a bit of both. It don't just have to be all light or all dark. We live in this or that kind of environment and culture these days. There's no this or that. It's not dark or light. You can have a bit of both. You think about our own very own lives, right? Is our life always bright, light, and funny? No. Is our life always dark and horrible and depressing? Well, maybe for some people. But what is life? Life is a variety of emotions and feelings. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's mid and boring, and sometimes it's really, really bad, right? And that's what a film has to do. That's what a story has to do. It's got to have the good, the bad, and the goddamn ugly. And I think that's very important when you're telling a story, that there's some happy moments, There's some devastating moments, there's in the middle moments, and some really devastating moments too. So Superman's characterization, you've got to make him likable. You know, people say he's too nice, he's too powerful to be relatable. I don't agree with that. I don't believe that you have to see yourself on the screen. I think it's actually important to see the opposite of yourself on the screen, because when I grew up, a lot of movies, not all of them, some movies had, you know, great realism, and we do need our our realistic movies and television shows out there, but it shouldn't all be about realism. There needs to be a place for escapism. I suspect there's so much anxiety and depression these days because there's nothing to escape to, because everything's about the real world. You go on Twitter, you know, it's so polarizing and depressing and negative and toxic, isn't it? You go and watch a film and it's about the real world. It's about toxic masculinity or some other bullshit that LA want to talk about, right? Where is the escapism? Because when your escapism movies are not escapist anymore, and they're forcing your head in the real world, of course you're going to have anxiety. Of course you're going to have depression. So we need characters like Superman not to be in the real world. That was the issue with Snyder, Goya, Terrio, and Nolan putting Superman in the real world. It's a problem if a character that's meant to be your genie in the bottle, wish fulfillment, ends up being in the real world, then you have no escapism whatsoever. And this is one of the many reasons that Man of Steel didn't bring in $1 billion, because you don't put Superman in the real world. It's actually a very, very silly thing to do. But David Goyer clearly isn't a Superman fan. And I think you have to understand something. If you're a Superman fan, you understand what Superman is. And you understand what's good about Superman and what works with Superman. We love to see him fly. We like him to use his powers, but I don't want to see him overpowered. I don't want to see him winning easily. And you do that by giving him enemies that are formidable and hard to beat and tactical and intelligent. Yes, basically Superman can kill anyone he wants. He can heat vision an enemy, a villain, and break their neck and break their legs. But that's the point. Superman isn't a cruel killer. So he won't hurt you just to beat you and put you in prison. That's what makes Superman's role so challenging, because he's got to bring you in as peacefully as possible because of his moral values. So when people say, well, why doesn't Superman just do this? Because he could, but he doesn't want to. And that's the point. That's the thing about Superman. And so how does Superman Legacy make $1 billion? Well, it's very interesting rewatching constantly as I do Superman the movie, because Superman the movie is basically two kids on a date. They really make the love story between Superman and Lois the central point of the movie. And I think that's a very important element. The problem is today, it's something Hollywood refused to do. They hate straight relationships. They hate straight people. And we've seen what's happened with Jenna Ortega. You know, shit-talking our Miles, the showrunners, the people who created Smallville, on Wednesday for creating a love triangle. Now, if you created her a little bi or gay love triangle, Jenna wouldn't be shit-talking the showrunners. You see, the reason she shit-talked our Miles there wasn't because she was offended that Wednesday would never be involved in that or anything like that. It's because it was a straight relationship, and that's the problem with Gen Z. This is the problem with LA, and this is the problem with Hollywood at the moment. It's been 8 years of doing the wrong thing because they're triggered by a former president. And it's very disappointing that your business revolves around your hatred and your political opinions, right? So Hollywood has to change. I think people are still receptive and still relate to straight love stories. I even think like gay and bi and trans audiences do as well. I do. I really do believe that. Because I said it before, right? Like Top Gun Maverick isn't a love story, but it's about a straight white guy. And obviously with the money it made, trans people, gay people, and people from other diverse backgrounds must have gone to see it repeatedly. It wasn't just straight and white people who enjoyed Top Gun Maverick. It wouldn't have made over $2 billion. Would it now? It's not possible or feasible. So you can kind of assume that the natural order of things, if you like, the way movies used to be, is very receptive to all walks of life, which of course is very interesting. So Superman and Lois need that relationship. But this isn't going to be Superman the movie. This isn't going to be an origin tale. This is set in year 2, if I've understood James Gunn right. And of course, some of his, messaging has been a bit mixed and confusing, but I think Superman Legacy is set during year 2, the same as Matt Reeves' The Batman. Whether that's a good idea or not, we'll have to wait and see. So, as we've discussed on this channel before, that means you skip the origin, Clark and Lois meeting. So it can be interesting what kind of history Superman has at the point we meet him in Superman Legacy. Because the reason we're going into year 2 is because Gunn wants a ready-made, living, breathing DC universe. He doesn't want to set up the Justice League slowly. He wants there to be a Justice League there. He wants there to be supervillains there. He wants this universe to have been living and breathing for years. And in fact, I'm quite excited about that scenario. It's what I want myself. I think that's very, very important that it's like that, because I think that will really excite fans as well. We've tried building it up from the beginning, and it hasn't worked. The DCEU, whether you love the DCEU, love the Snyderverse or not or whatever, it simply didn't work. You know it, and I know it. And the box office, look, box offices don't lie. People aren't stupid. It didn't work. It's okay to love Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Zack Snyder's Justice League and say, well, actually, we love those films, but it didn't work. And it's all right to say, as a fan of those things, you know what? I understand why some people didn't get into it, didn't like it. I understand, right? People want a different type of Superman. And do they want the Christopher Reeve Superman? Do they want the Henry Cavill Superman? Or do they even want the Brandon Routh Superman, who basically is kind of an extension of the Christopher Reeve Superman? Listen, you don't have to be Christopher Reeve's Superman. You don't have to be Henry's Superman or Brandon's Superman. You just have to be Superman. Superman is a good guy. He has Midwestern values. He's very pure. I think there's a great moment in Superman the movie where people always question Superman's, truth, justice, and the American way. It's very nationalistic, things like that. But I think even back then, because in the 70s, people were very anti-government establishment, it's brilliant what Donner and Mankiewicz do in the script. So basically, Superman says, Lois asks him in the interview on the balcony, why are you here? And he goes, I'm here to uphold truth, justice, and the American way. And Lois mocks him and says, you're going to be fighting every elected official. I love that. I may have mentioned that on this channel or not before, but I love that. Because you've got Superman going, I'm here to uphold truth, justice, and the American way, which is something very traditional with Superman and people like to hear. But because you've got Lois mocking it and being very cynical about it, you've got the audience's point of view there, but Superman ain't going to change. That's Superman. Because his parents in Smallville were very traditional, if you like, I suppose Midwestern, white people, go to church, they have their values. It's okay to be those people. It's also okay to be black people with their values. It's also okay to be Asian with those values. Everyone has their separate values, and that's okay. But what I think was great for audiences back then, especially those type of audiences which were against the establishment, because of Nixon and what he did, and because of Vietnam as well, it was great to have Superman say those iconic lines, but also having Lois Lane, a cynical reporter, saying, ha, right. Even though she flipping idolizes the pavement he walks on. She thinks he's the dog's nuts. She still mocks him when he says something like that. She basically reacts in a way that any of us would, because normal people would say, what are you on, mate? Truth, justice, and the American way. Are you fucking joking? The American way. Are you being fucking serious? And basically, without swearing, and without putting too fine a point of it, that's what Lois does. So James Gunn and Peter Safran have mentioned that Superman, is all about truth, justice, and the American way. I'm surprised But because it's interesting, because the comics have become, let's say, a little bit more woke, and I think Marvel Comics have and DC Comics have as well. Whether that's good or bad, I'll let you lot decide that. I really don't know where we are anymore politically, and I think, as I say, we're in such a polarizing world now, it's very difficult. But I think, even in a polarizing world, it's not difficult to understand why we need a great Superman. Superman can bring back innocence to cinema as Superman the movie did. And I think we do need innocence in cinema again. We do need a Superman we can look up to, just like we looked up to Christopher Reeve's Superman. And I think that's utterly important. I really do. And if we get this character right, if James Gunn gets this character and movie right, and gets Superman's supporting characters, cast of characters right, and his rogues gallery. Let's discuss the rogues gallery, because it's interesting. People always say to me, who don't read the comics, say, well, Batman's got a great rogues gallery, but Superman hasn't. Well, how do you know that? Oh, because in the 60s, there was a series that depicted all Batman's rogue gallery. In Gotham, they did an even better job than the 60s show, depicting Batman's assaulted rogues gallery, right? And then you've got the Dark Knight trilogy, you've got, Tim Burton's 2 movies, then you've got the other 2 movies. In Batman media, they have actually, adapted some different members of the rogues gallery. But with Superman live action movies and TV shows, it's been mainly Lex Luthor and this one and that one. That's been the problem. And I think Superman fans have been begging writers and directors for years, and TV showrunners, please do more than Lex Luthor. We want Lex to be there and pulling the strings from the background, but we don't really want him to be the main villain anymore. And I think most people are in agreement about that. But Superman has a great rogues gallery himself. And the only reason a lot of people don't know about them is because they've never really been depicted in live action enough. And there's so many Lobo is a great Superman villain. More of a, I suppose, anti-hero villain, however you want to look at him. And I'm very excited to see him. Whether Jason Momoa will eventually end up playing him or not, we'll have to wait and see. I think Jason would make a great Lobo. We'll have to see how Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom works out and see where the future is for Aquaman and Jason Momoa too. So it's really exciting that potentially, fingers crossed, we're getting Lobo. Because we saw him in Krypton, but we haven't seen him in any other live action, unless I missed something he was in. And it's important to depict these other, members of Superman's rogues gallery, because he's got a great rogues gallery. We've had a couple of live action interpretations of Brainiac. Smallville did a very different one and kind of broke canon with Brainiac in Smallville. He was still he's the whatever they call him, the artificial intelligence or whatever they called him on Smallville, right? What did they call him? I can't remember now. Anyway, basically he was still called Brainiac. But in the comics, Brainiac is this green creature. He's a collector of wealth. He weren't none of that on Smallville, so they really, really changed him. Then on Krypton, they were very, very comic book accurate with Brainiac, and he was fantastic. But I think, a Superman movie is crying out for a Brainiac story, for example. Fans would love a Brainiac story. We've been begging people for a Brainiac supervillain story for ages. And in fact, Bryan Singer's Superman Man of Steel, which was the sequel to Superman Returns, was going to deal with Brainiac, and I think that would have been very, very interesting to see how that went. But yeah, you can't have Lex Luthor anymore as the main villain. That was part of the problem with Superman Returns. Superman Returns is a sequel to Superman 2. So it's stuck with the Lex Luthor who's obsessed with buying land, blah, blah, blah. Exactly the same kind of villain plan in Superman Returns. And although Spacey modelled his Lex more on Michael Rosenbaum than Gene Hackman, because Spacey really liked Rosenbaum's version of Lex, but ultimately that's not the version he was playing. He was Gene Hackman's Lex, because that's what they were continuing. And there lied the problem. I think if Spacey didn't have all his issues, he's proved his innocence now, but it doesn't mean he's actually innocent. And I don't know where you all are with Kevin Spacey, but I do think he was a very, very good on-screen Lex. And Spacey, as an actor and an artist, has great quality, if not as a human being. But, Yeah, I mean, we don't know who they're going to cast as Lex. I think they may go quite unknown with Lex Luthor. It's going to be interesting, but we are getting a Lex Luthor, I think that's for sure. If you believe the rumours, we're definitely getting a Jimmy Olsen. Lots of rumours on Jimmy's casting as well. Very exciting. He's going to be quite young as well, because Jimmy Olsen in the comics in the early days was like 16, 17. He was like a school leaver. And I think that kind of age is quite important for Jimmy Olsen as well. Jimmy Olsen, I've always said, is a very important character because he's us. He's a normal human being, a kid leaving school that becomes Superman's best pal. We've never really done the Superman's best pal thing in Superman live action. I mean, the Jimmy Olsen in the Donnerverse was pretty cool, but I wouldn't say him and Superman were best pals, and we haven't really seen that. Now, off-screen in Supergirl, there was supposed to be this big friendship between Jimmy and Superman, but we never saw it bloom in a Superman TV show. So, yeah, I think Superman needs to be Superman. I think Superman needs to be faithful to its set of canon. Unfortunately, with Superman, especially with Singer, Snyder, Goya, Terrio, Nolan, Snyder, all of these people, they thought they were superior to the sum parts and concepts that have served Superman so well for what, 70 or 80 years now. And I think when you think you're smarter than the material, you have a problem. One thing Dick Donner said at the time is, I don't want people to think that we're smarter than the material, that we think we're smarter than the material. And Donner didn't think that. He took what was there, and it was amazing, and it worked. It really did work, and it captured people's imagination, because Donner and Mankiewicz and everyone who worked on that film, mainly, were actually Superman fans and had an imagination, used their imagination when they were making that film. So these are the facets that Superman Legacy needs to make $1 billion. I do not believe it's impossible for a Superman movie to make $1 billion. It's quite feasible. But with like everything else, you've got to do the right things, because audiences are not dumb. They want a good Superman costume. So thing number one that the movies have never really done, take a costume from the comic books, a popular version of the Superman graphic novels, and design a costume for him to wear from the comics, instead of creating your own version of the suits. The Superman Returns costume is terrible. I really like the Man of Steel costume, but there's elements of it I could have lived without. So I just would like to see one more inspired from the comics. But I will go back and say, I do like the Man of Steel costume, and I think it would be cool if the colours were slightly lighter, so we can see the colours and the colours can pop a little bit, right? Superman Returns and Man of Steel had darker reds and darker blues. And even Wonder Woman's costume was darker reds and darker blues, or whatever those colours were. You know, and I don't understand this obsession these days with the darker reds and the darker blues and the darker yellows. I don't really get why they have to be dark, why everything has to be dark and dingy, right? Look, I'm not saying I hate it, but I think at the end of the day, I just don't understand the preference to it. People went to see Superman the movie and they were uplifted in 1978. People came out the cinema and felt something special, just like I did when I saw Wonder Woman 2017. I felt inspired. I thought I saw something really special. And ultimately, it was because of an iconic character embracing love at the end of the day. And that's what Wonder Woman, the first Wonder Woman movie, was all about. And I think there was a lot of inspiration from Superman the movie with the first Wonder Woman. In a lot of ways, Steve Trevor kind of became Lois Lane in that movie, and it really, really worked for that movie. Superman the movie worked because it did a lot of things right. There's a lot of things that you can't use from Superman the movie today because of pacing issues and because we live, you know, in a different contemporary time, and that's okay. I'm not saying you need to copy and paste that movie, but you have to do the right things for Superman. Superman is Superman. You can't make him somebody else. Now, we've had these same conversations yesterday about Superman and trying to change him and trying to make him darker. And it's this, as I say, it's this overzealous nature of modern day creatives who are obsessed. You know, absolutely obsessed with realism and changing things that at the end of the day really don't need changing.